Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday. And Hodesh Tov to boot. Today we're welcoming the new Hebrew month of Iyar. Let's light up the darkness. And who's in the house on a Friday afternoon for a really beautiful, challenging, possibly controversial daf that we're going to be learning together. And interesting that this daf should be such a challenging one because it is our 1200th page that we are learning together. The Daf Yomi cycle contains 2,711 pages, and this is the 1200th of those. We're really approaching the halfway point, right? So half of 2,711 would be 1356. So 1356, we're about 156 pages from the halfway point. So about 5 months from the halfway point of our 7.5-year journey together. Who's in the house? Paula in Chicago, Jay Yitzhak in Minnesota, Paul in the great Northwest. Bill says, Shalom from mid-Missouri, where the pollen is so thick, my black car looks to be a dark golden color. Yeesh. I'm like having PTSD just imagining pollen that thick. I'm allergic to ragweed, among other things. But that's coming. That's coming here in LA. We're already having that super bloom. We had such a rainy winter that now the desert is blooming, right? The hills are alive, as it were. And so, the pollen will be close behind. But thank God, right? So I shared just today, actually, a little meme that I wrote, kind of based on a line of dialogue in our upcoming movie, The Man in the Long Black Coat. Excuse me. And I said that God doesn't make mistakes. If he gave you a tough challenge, it's because you can handle it or because you can do it. And a lot of people said, Amen, beautiful, inspiring thought. And then there's a bunch of comments, oh, that's ridiculous, you're going to say that, calamities and tragedies that have been befallen individuals and communities, it's because God did that on purpose. The answer is yes. God doesn't make mistakes. Now, that's a very difficult thing to hear when you're in the midst of a calamity or the victim of true evil. I think a woman actually said, so God sent me a rape because I can handle it. That's a very tough thing to say, and you don't say that to people when they're dealing with a tragedy. That's the last thing you would say to them. I just sent that out, to the general audience. And yet, nonetheless, it is true, right? The Talmud says it often as according to the camel, so is the burden, right? But it is meant to be an inspiring and uplifting and strengthening thought, right? And we actually, have a character in our movie who is a Holocaust survivor and who lost his faith, but, who survived, right? Against all odds, he survived. Now, not everybody survived. My grandfather did not survive. My grandmother did. We don't apply theology to specific situations, but it's something that you can draw from, right? And we don't have to go right to the extreme examples of people who are just right now going through an unbearable burden. when we look at so many of the smaller challenges in our life, and by smaller, I mean, smaller than enduring, death or, close to death, torture, Holocaust, etc. That's not really the everyday situation for most of us. Most of us are going through a lot of stress and really, really difficult challenges, just having to do with making a living, with facing disease, etc. And obviously, we don't survive, every cancer that comes our way. Not everybody survives, by design. I mean, in the world, there's a lot of calamity, there is disease, etc. And meeting the challenge, may not mean outliving a terrible disease. It may mean facing that disease with grace. It may mean that, we perish from this world, but our soul goes on, and our soul will understand why we were faced with that calamity. We believe in reincarnation. So, it may mean that this lifetime was short because, somebody had just a short amount of work to do to sort of finish up the work that they began in another lifetime. I mean, there's no easy answers to this kind of statement and to these kinds of calamities that people face. But it's meant to be a source of strength to us. That God orchestrates the world, and God is not powerless, and God doesn't make mistakes, right? So if we're dealing with something that's really, really difficult, it is because we can face that challenge, and maybe we can face a challenge that somebody else wouldn't be able to face. We can handle a challenge that somebody else wouldn't be able to handle, even in its terrifying, desperate, tragic nature. Yes, it was sent to us for a reason, right? And that reason may not be apparent in this world and may not be apparent to us. But there is a reason for it nonetheless. That is our faith, and that it should be or can be a source of strength. Maybe not in the moment, maybe not this year, maybe it'll take years to look back on a terrible challenge and understand that, because of that terrible tragedy that I endured, I learned something, and I was able to be a help to other people who are going through that tragedy now. There's a lot of possibilities of what the lesson means. At any rate, that's about a meme I shared earlier today. The controversy that we'll encounter in this page is of a different nature, and it's about women learning Torah. And, thank God we have so many women learning Torah and learning with us and learning the oral tradition, learning Gemara in this class. And now we're going to encounter a teaching that says women should not be taught Torah. Daughters should not be taught Torah. How do we reconcile this? I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I checked with the rabbi before teaching this class. So we do teach our daughters Torah. We do teach women Torah. How are we going to reconcile the teaching that we're going to encounter today? It's actually a fascinating sort of back and forth that we do. And I think you'll enjoy seeing what the sages did with it and what modern great rabbis do with it. So here we go. Let's get into our 1200th page together. This is page 20 here in Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of the suspected adulteress. We are in chapter 3, and today we begin with Mishnah number 2. Mishnah number 2. If before the scroll was erased, she said, right? So the suspected adulteress, it was a woman, she's a man's wife, and he said to her, do not seclude yourself with that particular man. You've already behaved inappropriately with him. He gave her that warning in front of witnesses. She secluded herself with that man anyway. Witnesses saw that. So at that point, her behavior is considered, not just scandalous and inappropriate, but enough to render her prohibited to her husband. They cannot be physically together again. And if the temple is standing in Jerusalem, as it was up until about 2,000 years ago, the husband and wife go to the temple, and she's going to go through this Sotah ritual. And she's going to drink water that has some dirt from the temple floor, the ink that is dissolved into it from a scroll that was written for her containing certain verses about the Sotah ritual. And as we learned yesterday, just a little bit of wormwood to give it a bitter taste. She drinks that after she has, said Amen, Amen, when the priest administered the verses to her that basically says, look, if when you were secluded with that man, you committed adultery with him, you should admit it, because this water of bitterness will kill you if you committed adultery. But if in fact she is innocent, then she can drink this water, she'll be fine, and then she and her husband will be permitted to each other again. So here, Mishnah number 2 in chapter 3 says, if before the scroll was erased, right before the verses, the ink was dissolved into the water of bitterness, if before the scroll was erased, she said, I will not drink. Right now, I will not drink. Does that mean she's admitting that she committed adultery? Or as we learned yesterday, it might mean that she's afraid. She's just simply afraid and doesn't want to drink the water. So if before the scroll was erased and she said, I will not drink, then the scroll that was written for her is sequestered, meaning it's put into a geniza because it contains God's name. You don't just throw it away. It goes into that special storage place of documents that have God's name written on them, but which can no longer be used for whatever reason, Torahs that are worn out, or a Sotah scroll that now is not going to be used because she refuses to drink. So the scroll that was written for her is sequestered. It's placed in the geniza. And her meal offering, the meal offering of jealousy, the meal offering of a Sotah, is burned and scattered over the place of the ashes. And her scroll is not fit to give to another Sotah, a different suspected adulteress, to drink. If the scroll was erased and afterwards she said, I am defiled, right, meaning she admits that she committed adultery, then the water is poured out and her meal offering is scattered in the place of the ashes. And she will survive the ordeal because she doesn't drink the water. Now she and her husband are going to remain prohibited to each other, so they need to divorce because she committed adultery. If the scroll was already erased and she said, I will not drink, she is forced to drink it against her will. This is the case we encountered yesterday where she is afraid to drink it even though she's innocent, so we want her to drink it and prove her innocence. Now, when a guilty woman drinks, she does not manage, when a guilty woman drinks the water, she does not manage to finish drinking the water before her face turns green and her eyes bulge and her skin becomes full of protruding veins. She's now dying from the ordeal, and the people standing in the temple say, remove her so that she does not render the temple courtyard impure by dying there. And now the Mishnah limits the scope of the previous statement. If she has merit, it delays punishment for her, and she does not die immediately. Right? So we saw this in the last chapter, a discussion about this, that a woman might have certain merit that she acquired during her lifetime, even a lot of merit, and that will actually forestall the water of bitterness working. And then people might think, oh, the water of bitterness doesn't work. But they need to understand that because of her merit, it's going to delay the death of the adulteress that this water causes, but it will not delay it indefinitely. So if she has merit, it delays punishment for her, and she does not die immediately. There is a merit that delays punishment for 1 year. There is a larger merit that delays punishment for 2 years. And there is a merit that delays punishment for 3 years. And from here, Ben Azai states a woman is obligated to teach his daughter Torah. Right? So Ben Azai, the sage Ben Azai, states a person is obligated to teach his daughter Torah, so that if she drinks and does not die immediately, she will know that some merit has delayed punishment for her. Now, this could be that, women should know Torah so that if they become a Sotah and they don't die immediately, they'll understand why they didn't die immediately. But it can also be meaning that women should know Torah so they understand that a Sotah may have some merit. And that's why when they witness that a Sotah drinks the water, doesn't die immediately, but dies later, that's what happened. She had some merit. It just saved her for a while. But in other words, they should know that the water of bitterness does work. And therefore, it would be a deterrent, right, of women committing adultery. They know this. And Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with Ben Azai, and he says anyone who teaches his daughter Torah is teaching her promiscuity. You're like, what? The last thing that learning Torah would do is make a person promiscuous. What the heck is Rabbi Eliezer saying? Okay, let's read a few notes about this. Rav Steinsaltz has quite a bit to say about this teaching of Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah. And he says, a woman who studies Torah receives a reward. How can you say teaches promiscuity? No, women who learn Torah receive a reward. But her reward is not equal to that of a man. Why? Because unlike men, she is not commanded to learn Torah. Right? Men are obligated to learn Torah on a regular basis, right? And like every time-bound positive mitzvah, women are not obligated in it because, especially in the ancient world, they were the primary caregivers to children. So they couldn't be obligated to learn Torah. It would make their schedule impossible. Nonetheless, we see here that women are rewarded for learning Torah even though they are not obligated. Why is the reward greater? Because the reward, just like would a man be rewarded for lighting candles on Shabbos if there was no woman in the house to do it? There would be a reward for that, but not as great as the reward of women lighting candles on Friday afternoon because women are obligated in that mitzvah and men are not. Now, despite the fact that women receive a reward if they study Torah, the sages ruled that a man should not teach Torah to his daughter. Why? Since most women's minds are not attuned to learning, and they render the words of the Torah into nonsense. Now, this is the thinking in the ancient world. Therefore, the sages stated, anyone who teaches his daughter Torah is considered as though he taught her foolishness. Now, you'll note that even in the Talmud, even the sages of the Talmud discuss that there were certain women, like Rabbi Meir's wife, Beruria, who were extremely knowledgeable in Torah and even in the oral Torah. So how can you say this general statement? Is it just that there are exceptions, or is it that not everyone agrees with this teaching? Now, this applies only with regard that they shouldn't teach their daughters Torah, according to the sages, but this applies only with regard to the oral Torah, what we're learning here, the Talmud. However, with regard to the written Torah, right, the Torah itself and Scripture, although one should not teach the written Torah to one's daughter, it is not considered as though he taught her foolishness. Right? It's not that you're obligated to teach her the written Torah, but if you do, she learns and she learns well. You're not teaching her foolishness because women's minds, even in the ancient world, were attuned to what's taught in the written Torah. Now, the distinction between the oral and written Torah stems from the statement of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in Tractate Chagig on page 3a, that women are also required to participate in the mitzvah, the commandment of assembly. That's the Chachal, which we're in a year right now of the Chachal, meaning that every 7 years, the entire nation would gather in Jerusalem, and the king would read the Torah to them. And so, i.e., the obligation to assemble in the temple on Sukkot in the year following the sabbatical year in order to hear the written Torah being read publicly. And women are obligated in that just like men. Some of the later authorities state that the above ruling does not apply to a woman who decides to study Torah on her own initiative, as by doing so, she proves that she does not belong in the category of women who turn the Torah into nonsense. Right? Maybe not everyone is attuned to sort of learn Torah or to learn the oral Torah. Like, their brain doesn't work that way. They don't have Gemara cop. But if you want to learn, then it's because you do have a brain that is attuned in that way, no matter who you are, right? So even in the ancient world, they said, well, women who want to learn Torah, go for it. They showed that their mind would not turn that into nonsense. And the Rima writes that women are certainly obligated to learn the laws that are applicable to them, which is a form of Torah study. So the later authorities write that nowadays, when women study secular subjects, right, in the ancient world, it's not like anyone was a scholar of any sort unless they were a Torah scholar, and the few, far between here and there, people, who actually became scholars of higher learning, right? Most people, 99% of the people, were just struggling to earn a living. And had no formal education. And in such a world, for them to start acquiring formal education through Torah study was an incredible, sort of step up in bringing learning to the people. But they weren't going to obligate women in that. They were only going to obligate the men who had a little bit more time, aside from their hard work in the fields, as it were. That they had to also learn Torah study, but for the women who, had children who could, demand their time at any time of day, they weren't going to be obligated in that, right? However, times have changed, right? And now we see how the oral law creates the possibility of adjusting the tradition, not quickly, not willy-nilly, not as anybody sees fit, but over time, and led by the elders of the generation, the tradition adjusts, right? And so in modern times, when a lot more people are doing higher learning, and women just as much as men, so now the law changes, right? So the Rima writes that women are certainly obligated to learn the laws of, and the later authorities write that nowadays, when women study secular subjects, it is incumbent upon them to study Torah as well. I mean, if you're going to be learning and you show that you have the ability to learn at a high level, going to university, etc., well, then you should certainly be learning Torah as well because you have the capacity to learn and flourish in that learning. Now that women study secular subjects, it is incumbent upon them to study Torah as well, and girls should be taught at least the entire written Torah and the ethical teachings of Tractate Avos, right? Pirkei Avos. Furthermore, some authorities state that women are required to study those parts of the Torah that deal with matters of faith, as women are obligated to believe in God and to love and to fear Him just like everyone else, and we find that in Shulchan Aruch. Okay. Back to our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehoshua says, a woman desires to read, a slight change in subject, although we're talking about women still. Rabbi Yehoshua says, a woman desires to receive the amount of a kav of food and have a sexual relationship, meaning to be married, rather than to receive 9 kav of food and be abstinent, right? Saying a woman would prefer to be in a romantic and intimate relationship, even if it means she's going to be poor, rather than to be wealthy and not have such a relationship, according to Rabbi Yehoshua. And he would say, now that Rabbi Yehoshua is giving kind of these wisdom teachings, we're going to have something a little different. He would say, a foolish man of piety and a conniving wicked person and an abstinent woman, which is the translation of Purusha, and those who injure themselves out of false abstinence, all these are people who erode the world. What is Rabbi Yehoshua talking about? Explains Rav Steinsaltz. The Mishnah refers critically to women who are unwilling to accept a life of abstinence. This would be, what does that mean? Refers critically to women who are unwilling to accept a life of abstinence. Yet, at the same time, it declares that an abstinent woman, as well as those who injure themselves out of false abstinence, are among those who erode the world. So the Gemara, page 22a, right, we'll get that in 2 days, explains that the Mishnah's criticism pertains to individuals who are self-righteous, sanctimonious, and hypocritical. So the terms Purusha and Purushin can be translated as those who engage in self-restraint, positive, but they can also carry the negative connotation of separatists who reject community norms. So the term Purushim, sometimes rendered Purushin, Pharisees, was also used by the opponents of rabbinic Judaism in reference to the rabbinic sages, often in a derogatory sense. And its usage here appears to be an example of self-criticism on the part of the sages themselves with regard to the activities of some members of their community. What are they saying? They're saying you need to be a man or a woman of faith. You need to be learned. You need to know what the laws are that apply to you so that you can live the life that God intends for you to live, that God is asking for you to live in the covenant that He has with the Jewish people. If you start taking on stringencies beyond what God asks of you, you can easily stray into this world of sanctimoniousness, hypocrisy, false piety, etc. Right? When you start to make yourself into some kind of, an ascetic who lives in a cave to distance himself from the world, because you consider that's the holy way to live, so you made a mistake, right? You blew it. That is not what God asks of us. God wants us to enjoy all of the permitted pleasures of this world and to have a life of joy and meaning. There are sacrifices to be made. There's service to be done in kind of fulfilling our role as God's children, of whom something is expected. But to take it too far, and in the name of piety, to live a life, that is painful and empty of joy, is not only foolishness, it, according to Rabbi Yehoshua, erodes the world. That's Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Let's get into the commentary. The Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Meir, when I was studying Torah before Rabbi Akiva, as his disciple, I used to put copper sulfate into the ink with which I wrote Torah scrolls, and he did not say anything to me in protest. Afterward, when I came to learn Torah before Rabbi Yishmael, he said to me, "My son, what is your vocation?" I said to him, "I am a scribe who writes Torah scrolls." And he said to me, "My son, be careful in your work, as your work is the work of heaven, lest you omit a single letter from the Torah scroll or add a single letter. And in this you are found to be destroying the entire world if the mistake alters the meaning of the verse and results in blasphemy," right? If a scribe gets a Torah scroll wrong and other people read a law there the wrong way, and then they're thinking that they're doing, God's will, end up not doing it, then the scribe causes blasphemy. So you have to be very careful. Okay. So Rabbi Meir continues, I said to Rabbi Yishmael, I have one substance that I put into the ink, and it is called copper sulfate, which prevents the writing from being erased. And he said to me, and may copper sulfate be put into the ink? The Torah clearly said with regard to the scroll of the Sotah, and the priest shall write these curses in a scroll, and he shall blot them out into the water of bitterness. And this indicates that the Torah requires writing that can be blotted out. That's not the law, but right. It seems like Rabbi Meir heard from Rabbi Yishmael that just as the ink with which the scroll of the Sotah is written is the kind of ink that will dissolve in water, and those verses appear in the Torah, so maybe we should learn out from that the ink of any Torah scroll should be the type that if it was put in water, it would dissolve and fall off the parchment. Now, that's kind of a scary thought, right? So if, God forbid, somebody was reading the Torah and it moved him to tears, and a tear fell on the Torah, it would totally, mess up the ink, and it would render that Torah scroll unfit for use. So how did we get out of that situation? So since Rabbi Meir's remark about copper sulfate seems unrelated to Rabbi Yishmael's previous statement about make sure you don't add or miss out or miss a letter when you write Torah scrolls. So what is it that Rabbi Yishmael is saying to Rabbi Meir, and what is Rabbi Meir replying to Rabbi Yishmael? What's really going on in this conversation? So the Gemara explains this is what Rabbi Meir is saying to him. It is not necessary to say that I should not err by making omissions or additions, as I'm a sofer, I'm a scribe, I'm an expert, I know that. Rather, there is not even any reason for concern with regard to a fly, lest it come and sit on the protrusion of the letter Dalet and erase it, thereby rendering it the letter Resh, right? Like the Dalet and the Resh are very similar looking letters. It's just a little extension on the top bar of the Dalet, and if a fly was to remove that ink, and it would become a Resh, so it could change the meaning of the word and lead to blasphemy. So Rabbi Meir says, don't worry, that's not going to happen in a Torah scroll that I wrote, because I mix in this copper sulfate that makes the ink fixed. And once I write it, it's not easily erased or blotted out. Right, says Rabbi Meir, there is no concern of such erasure occurring since I have this substance, copper sulfate, which makes the ink fixed. So now the Gemara questions the initial part of Rabbi Meir's statement. But is that so? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Meir said, when I was studying Torah before Rabbi Yishmael, I used to put copper sulfate into the ink with which I wrote Torah scrolls, and he did not say anything to me. Afterward, when I came to learn Torah with Rabbi Akiva, he prohibited me from putting copper sulfate in the ink. So the Gemara points out that there are two separate contradictions between these statements. Rabbi Yehuda's statement with regard to Rabbi Meir, first serving Rabbi Akiva as a disciple, is difficult, as it is contradicted by the statement in the Baraisa with regard to that he first served Rabbi Yishmael and then Rabbi Akiva. Further, Rabbi Yehuda's statement is difficult since he states that Rabbi Yishmael is the one who prohibited the addition of copper sulfate so that the ink wouldn't be erased. And this is contradicted by the statement in the Baraisa that it was Rabbi Akiva who prohibited the addition of copper sulfate and not Rabbi Yishmael. So how do we reconcile these seeming contradictions? So the Gemara answers, granted the apparent contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda's statement with regard to Rabbi Meir serving Rabbi Akiva first and the statement of the Baraisa that he served Rabbi Yishmael first, this poses no difficulty because initially he came before Rabbi Akiva to study, but since he could not comprehend the extremely complicated method of learning that Rabbi Akiva was teaching, Rabbi Meir left and went to Rabbi Yishmael, and then he learned the oral tradition from Rabbi Yishmael, and afterward he returned before Rabbi Akiva, and now he was able to grasp what Rabbi Akiva was teaching. So that's why you might think he went to Rabbi Yishmael before Rabbi Akiva, and the other one is the other way around. It's because he went to Rabbi Akiva and wasn't able to learn. He went to Rabbi Yishmael, he learned, then he went back to Rabbi Akiva. Okay. However, the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda's statement that it was Rabbi Yishmael who prohibited the addition of copper sulfate and the statement of the Baraisa that it was Rabbi Akiva who prohibited the addition of copper sulfate, this poses a real difficulty. And the Gemara says, indeed, the matter is difficult. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Meir would say, copper sulfate may be put into the ink that is used for all sacred writings, meaning Torah scrolls, tefillin, and mezuzahs, except for the ink used to write the Torah passage about the Sotah. Okay, we get that. So if you're writing a Torah scroll, or you're writing the scroll that goes into tefillin, or you're writing the Torah scroll that goes in a mezuzah on a doorway, so you should put something in the ink that makes it permanent and it doesn't get blotted out easily. Okay, we get it. And if you're writing a scroll for a Sotah where the ink has to be dissolved in the water, for sure you wouldn't put the copper sulfate in because you need that ink to come off the parchment and go in the water. The issue is, so when you're writing a Torah scroll and you come to the passage of the Sotah that would be copied over into the scroll for a Sotah and then dissolved in the water, but when you're actually writing that passage in a Torah scroll, are you not going to put the copper sulfate in that ink so that the passage of the Sotah within a Torah scroll where everything else the ink is fixed, are you going to there use, ink that could easily dissolve because it's the passage of the Sotah? Or are you only going to use, dissolving type of ink when you're actually creating the scroll of the Sotah, but not when you're writing those passages within a Torah scroll? That's the question being addressed here. Right, so now we're on page 20b. And Rabbi Yaakov says, in the name of Rabbi Meir, it is except for the ink used to write the scroll with the Sotah passage used in the temple. Right, so in other words, the scroll that you're going... First of all, there's a scroll for every individual Sotah. Obviously, you use dissolving ink on that. What about they had a special scroll that they kind of would hang on the wall that had the passages of the Sotah on it, just that they would use to copy those verses when they were creating a scroll for a particular Sotah. So what about that kind of, model scroll used to copy out Sotah scrolls? There, do we use the permanent ink or the dissolving ink? And the Gemara asks, what is the difference between these two opinions? And the Gemara replies, Rabbi Yirmiyah says that there's a difference between them with regard to whether it is permitted to erase the passage for the Sotah from a Torah scroll. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir holds that this is permitted, and therefore the passage in the Torah scroll must be written with ink that does not contain copper sulfate, so that it can be erased. And by contrast, according to Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Meir holds that it is prohibited to erase the passage from a Torah scroll, and therefore the passage may be written with ink containing copper sulfate. I mean, it seems like, would you really have such an emergency that here comes a Sotah who needs, a Torah scroll written for her, and so that, you write that out and the ink dissolves and that goes into the waters of bitterness. But there's an emergency where there's no ink, there's no scroll, there's no scribe, there's no quill available, but she needs to drink the water right now, so we're going to bring out an actual Torah, turn to the passage of this Torah, of the Sotah, and immerse that in water and, render that Torah scroll unfit so that we could dissolve some ink from it and put it into the water bowl of the Sotah? That just seems like, would that ever happen? No, I don't think that would ever happen. But against that possibility, should we write the verses of the Sotah in a Torah with dissolving ink? And the answer is no. We don't do that because a scroll for a Sotah, as we've learned, has to be written for her, and taking it out of a Torah would not work. It just wouldn't work. Would you write an entire Torah scroll in order to dissolve her passage? Why would you ever do that? So by contrast, according to Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Meir holds that it is prohibited to erase the passage from a Torah scroll, and therefore that passage, even the passage of the Sotah, can be written using the fixed ink, the copper sulfate ink, when writing that passage in the Torah. Now the Gemara assumes that according to Rabbi Yaakov, it is prohibited to erase the passage from a Torah scroll, since he holds that the scroll must be written for the sake of the Sotah, whereas Rabbi Yehuda, who permits this, holds that the scroll need not be written for the sake of the Sotah. Right? Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the majority when he says that the scroll used for a Sotah does not have to be written for her. He's the minority, that is not the law. But according to him, it could be done that way. And therefore, the opinions of these Tanaim are parallel to the opinions of those Tanaim, as it is taught in a Baraisa. The scroll of one Sotah is not fit to be used in the preparation of the water to give a different Sotah to drink, as it was not written for her. And Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia says her scroll is fit to be used in the preparation of the water to give to another Sotah to drink, since it does not need to be written for the sake of the Sotah. It can only be erased for a particular woman, but it doesn't have to be written for her. That's the minority view. Rav Papa said, perhaps that is not so, and the two disputes are not comparable. It is possible that the first Tana of the Baraisa states that the scroll may not be used for a different Sotah, only there in the case of a scroll written for a specific woman, since it was only designated in the name of one woman, for example, Rachel. It cannot again be designated in the name of a different woman, Leah, for example. So, however, in the case of the Torah scroll, which is written without specifying anyone, indeed we may erase the passage to prepare the water for a Sotah, even though it was not written for her sake. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that the comparison between the two disputes can be refuted for a different reason. Perhaps that is not so. It is possible that Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia states that the scroll may be used for another Sotah, only there with regard to the scroll written for a specific Sotah, as it was written for the purpose of the curses of a Sotah in general. However, in the case of a Torah scroll, which was written to be learned from, not to be erased, indeed, we may not erase it for the Sotah, as it was not written for any Sotah at all. And the Gemara asks, and doesn't Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia hold in accordance with that which is taught in the Mishna in Tractate Gittin, page 24a, with regard to one who wrote a bill of divorce, with which to divorce his wife, but later reconsidered, and he did not divorce her? So if a resident of his city found him and said to him, well, my name is the same as your name, my wife's name is the same as your wife's name, give me the bill of divorce and I will use it to divorce my wife. This is a real cheapskate, right? He wants to divorce his wife now because it's convenient, because there's extra, bill of divorce lying around that happens to have the same name as him and his wife's name. So rather than pay a scribe to write his own bill of divorce, he's going to seize the opportunity. Can he do that? Can he use somebody else's bill of divorce that they did not use, and which happens by coincidence to contain the same male name and the same female name in it? So can he do that? And he says, and I will use it to divorce my wife because it is unfit to divorce the other. I'm sorry. And doesn't Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshua hold in accordance with this that if somebody said he wants to do that, it is unfit for the other woman with it, right? He cannot do that. You cannot use a bill of divorce that was written for some other woman to divorce your own wife, even if your name is the same name as that husband and your wife's name is the same name as that wife's name. No, a bill of divorce has to be written for a particular couple. Now, the sages say in response, there, with regard to a bill of divorce, the merciful one states, Deuteronomy 24:1, and he shall write for her a bill of divorce. And this teaches that we require the writing to be performed for the sake of a specific woman. However, no similar requirement is mentioned with regard to the Sotah. And the Gemara asks, what do you mean no similar requirement is mentioned for the Sotah? Here too, with regard to the Sotah, the verse states, and the priest shall perform with her all of this law, indicating that the ritual must be performed for the sake of the specific woman. And the Gemara answers, what is the performance referred to in that verse? It is referring to the erasure, whereas the writing need not be done for the sake of a specific woman. That's the end of this particular argument, but the fact is, the law is, right, the Sotah scroll has to be written for her. You can't use somebody else's, nor can you use those passages from a Torah. Now, the Mishna states, when a guilty woman drinks, our Mishna states, when a guilty woman drinks, she does not manage to finish drinking before, if she's guilty, before it starts to, destroy her body and ultimately kill her, right? She does not manage to finish drinking before her face turns green and her eyes bulge and her skin becomes full of protruding veins. So the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah, which indicates that the water evaluates her while she's still drinking it? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says the priest sacrifices her meal offering and afterward forces her to drink, because according to the opinion of the rabbis, the meal offering is sacrificed only after she drinks. And as long as her meal offering has not been sacrificed, the water does not evaluate her, as it is written, and he shall bring her offering for her, for it is a meal offering of jealousy, a meal offering of remembrance, a reminder of iniquity. So the Gemara, right? So in other words, if the meal offering is brought after she drinks and the meal offering is part of the ritual, then how could the water evaluate whether she committed adultery or not until the meal offering is brought? But if they bring the meal offering first, the reason for that is so that when she drinks the water, it can take effect immediately. Now that's if she doesn't have any other merit that might delay, a guilty woman who happens to have some other merit that would delay the sentence, as it were. So the Gemara asks, say the latter clause of the Mishnah, if she has merit, it delays her punishment for her. Now we arrive at the opinion of the rabbis, as if this statement were in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, didn't he say merit does not delay punishment in the case of the bitter water of a Sotah? So Rav Chisda said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says the priest sacrifices her meal offering and afterward forces her to drink. Now, with regard to the order of the ritual, he holds in accordance with Rabbi Shimon. And with regard to the matter of merit delaying punishment, he holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Now, the Mishnah states, and the people standing in the temple say, remove her. If she's a guilty Sotah, and so this water with some dirt and ink in it is going to kill her miraculously because it's going to show that she committed adultery. And so she drinks it and she starts to have that reaction like, oh my gosh, she's guilty. She's going to die. Let's get her out of the temple so we don't have a dead body in the temple that would cause contamination in the temple, right? Ritual impurity, tuma. So they say remove her before she dies. And the Gemara asks, is this to say that a corpse is prohibited from being in the women's courtyard, which has the same status as the Levite camp in the desert, right? As we learned when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, right? So the whole encampment was the Israelite camp. The Levite camp was in the middle of that. And then within the middle of the Levite camp was the actual Mishkan, the tabernacle. where only the priests could enter, and a priest could not enter if he was ritually impure with any kind of impurity, whether from touching a dead body or having a seminal secretion or coming into contact with food that was tameh, any kind of ritual impurity. Now we're learning that, and then once the temple was built in Jerusalem, so we've learned elsewhere that the equivalent to that is that the whole city of Jerusalem is like the Israelite encampment. The Temple Mount is like the Levite encampment, and the actual sanctuary of the temple is, where only the priest can enter. That is like the tabernacle. So now they're saying, okay, now is she, when she drinks the water and she's about to die, is she in the sanctuary? Is she in the area of the temple that only priests could enter? No, she's not. She's in the women's courtyard, which has the same status as the Levite camp or as the whole Temple Mount. Are dead bodies permitted to be on the Temple Mount? Yes, they are. But isn't it taught in a baraisa, one who is ritually impure with impurity imparted by a corpse is permitted to enter the Levite camp? And the sages said that this is not only with regard to one who is ritually impure, tameh, with impurity imparted by a corpse, rather even a corpse itself may be brought into the Levite camp. As it is stated, and Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Right? Moses, who was a Levite and lived in the Levite camp in the wilderness, had the bones of Joseph with him that he was taking, right, to transport eventually to be buried in the land of Israel. So it must be that a dead body and somebody who's ritually impure by contact with a corpse can be in the Levite camp, can be on the Temple Mount. They just can't enter the precincts of the temple where only the priests could go. So Abaye said, the woman is removed, so therefore if she dies in that part, she's not going to create an insurmountable problem. Although, right, if a priest then helps her, right, or in other words, and then she dies, and then a priest touches that body to remove the body, now that priest is ritually impure with corpse tumah. He's going to have to go through a 7-day purification, and he will not be able to enter the sanctuary. So that should be reason enough to remove the body from there, not because it's prohibited for the corpse to be there. Abaye said, the woman is removed not due to a concern that she will die there, but rather lest the fear of the water cause her to begin to have her menses. And it is prohibited for a menstruating woman to enter the Levite camp, right? So corpse tumah doesn't prohibit you from entering the Levite camp or from being on the Temple Mount itself. But any other kind of tumah derived from a bodily secretion, whether it's a menstruating woman or a man who has had a seminal emission, a zav or a zava, any of those people cannot enter the Temple Mount at all. In this sense, there's a greater stringency for that kind of ritual impurity than for corpse tumah. So the Gemara asks, is this to say that fear causes muscular relaxation and menstrual bleeding? And the Gemara responds, yes, as it is written, and the queen, this is referring to Queen Esther in the book of Esther, and the queen was exceedingly pained, Esther 4:4. And Rav says this means that she began to menstruate. And the Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in a Mishna, Nida 39a, that trepidation, fear, eliminates the flow of menstrual blood? Presumably the Sotah experiences trepidation. The Gemara answers, trepidation generated by extended worry contracts the muscles and prevents the blood from flowing, but sudden fear relaxes the muscles and causes the blood to flow, unless you become a nida out of her fear of what's going to result from her drinking the water because she was guilty, and now we see her starting to develop those symptoms. They remove her right away, lest there be a nida in the Temple Mount. Now the Mishnah states, if she has merit, it delays punishment for 1 year, for 2 years, or for 3 years. And the Gemara asks, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah? It is not the opinion of Abba Yosei ben Hanan, and not the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yitzchak of Kfar Daram, and not the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. This is as it is taught in a baraisa. If she has merit, it delays punishment for her for 3 months, equivalent to the time necessary to recognize the fetus. This is the statement of Abba Yosei ben Hanan. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yitzchak of Kfar Daram says, merit delays punishment for 9 months. As it is stated, then she shall be cleared and shall conceive seed. So Numbers 5:28. So it is possible to infer from this that if she has merit, she will be cleared temporarily for the length of time required to conceive a child. And there in Psalms it says, a seed shall serve him. It shall be told of the Lord unto the next generation. Psalm 22. And this indicates that the seed must be fit to tell of the Lord once it matures. And a child can live only if it is born after the culmination of 9 months in the womb. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, merit delays punishment for 12 months. And although there is no explicit proof for the concept of merit, delaying punishment for 12 months, there is an allusion to the concept as it is written that Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar after interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream concerning the evil which would befall him, quote, therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you and redeem your sins with charity and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. A good prescription for anyone trying to make atonement. Now we're in 21a. And then there shall be an extension to your tranquility. An extension. You'll live a little longer. And it is written, all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 4:25. And it is written in the following verse that this occurred at the end of 12 months. None of the opinions in the Baraisa are in accordance with the Mishna's statement that the merit can delay punishment for up to 3 years, right? So we see in the case of Nebuchadnezzar committed tremendous evil in the world, that because he had done some good things, his life was extended a year, but not 3 years, not 10 years. So the Gemara answers. I'm almost done. So if you have questions or comments, please get them in now. Right, and the Gemara answers, actually the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, who states that merit delays punishment for 1 year. And he found a verse which states and repeats the possibility that punishment can be delayed, indicating that merit can delay punishment up to 3 times. As it is written, thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, yes, but for 4 I will not reverse it. Amos 1:11. So punishment can therefore be delayed for 3 consecutive periods of 1 year. And the Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yehoshua mean by stating, although there is no explicit proof for the concept of merit delaying punishment for 12 months, there is an allusion to the concept. The verses he cites state explicitly that punishment can be delayed for 12 months. And the Gemara answers, the proof is not explicit, as perhaps non-Jews are different, like Nebuchadnezzar, as swift judgment is not administered upon them as readily as it is upon the Jewish people, with whom God is more precise in executing judgment, right? That they're saying that, the Jews are held to this higher, tougher standard where, wickedness is punished more swiftly, right, than it is for non-Jews. You can always find a million exceptions to these principles. Doesn't mean that the principles don't work in all kinds of overt and hidden ways. Okay, let's go to questions or comments. One second. Okay, Bill. There was a great mystic in my tradition, Dame Julian of Norwich, who lived through the Black Death, who had a good encapsulation of this. God did not promise that you would not be battered, tempested, tormented, or even killed. You were promised that you would not be overcome. Bill, I think, is responding to what I said earlier about my controversial meme that I published on the Facebook page today, that God doesn't make mistakes. If he sent you a tough challenge, it's because you can face it, you can do it. That doesn't mean that there won't be calamity, that there won't be evil, that there won't be tragedy in the world, but it does mean that you may be stronger than you think, and that you have, what you need. You have the tools that you need, or maybe the help that you need if you seek it out to face whatever terribly difficult challenges you're in. Now, that's not something you tell somebody who's in the midst of their tragedy. Don't worry, you got this. It's maybe, something for people to find on their own, or something you could share very gently. We'll leave that alone. Sharon, so many mitzvahs, so many commandments are incumbent upon women. kashrut, making of matzahs, nida, and as we learned from Zipporah, Moses' wife, assuring the bris milah, the circumcision of their sons. How do we learn this if not through study? And Sharon, right, the sages agree with you, right? And there was a whole bunch of sources to exactly agree with you. If women have mitzvahs that are incumbent upon them, and it's not just, as you mentioned, it's not just candle lighting, challah, and you know, family purity. There's other mitzvahs too that are incumbent upon women. How are they going to be able to execute those mitzvahs properly if they don't engage in Torah study? So there you go. And Sharon, did Tamar's actions with Judah render her a Sotah? Well, it wouldn't be a Sotah because nobody warned her, right, in the presence of witnesses not to do that. And it's also a little bit difficult because is it really a Sotah if we're talking about, first of all, it was before the Torah was given. So, I mean, it wouldn't really be a Sotah. It wouldn't even really be a woman awaiting Yibum. But let's say that it was, right? Let's say that it would, that because we learned that our patriarchs and matriarchs sort of instinctively followed the Torah. So if she was really what she was a woman awaiting her yavam, right? Her first husband died childless, so she married his brother. They performed yibum, but he was Onan, and he didn't want to build up his brother's house by making her pregnant. He spilled his seed on the ground. God apparently didn't like that, so Onan died also. And now she's again a Yavama awaiting her Yavam, waiting to marry Shlach, the third son, the third brother. And in the end, she ends up marrying their father, Judah, right? But that's not, nowhere do we see in the Torah that a Yavama would end up marrying not, her late husband's brother, but his father. But even if, let's say, even if we're going to let the father stand in for the brother, is a woman who violates the bond that she has with her Yavam, by having promiscuous sex. Is she a Sotah? No, right? Because we learned a couple days ago that wouldn't even render her prohibited to her Yavam if she had sex during that period. It's definitely a transgression. It's definitely an avera, a sin for which she'll be held accountable. But it's not the same as committing adultery. And in any case, she was not warned, right, etc. So I think that while there are parallels, to the status of a Sotah and a Yavama, now in that case, in any case, she wouldn't really be a Sotah because the person that she slept with was the one that she intended to and end up did marry. But in any case, there are parallels between a Sotah and a widow awaiting her Yavam, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same situation. Okay, and then Renee made a comment talking about in my Lev Shemaya interview, Jenks Hoffman asked me, where is God in the, and I'm not going to say the curse word, but where is God in the garbage and the difficulties, the really crappy stuff that happens to us in our lives? And I answered, the crap is perhaps random. God in everything means to me that I must look for the blessing or opportunity in it. Later, when I was diagnosed with MS, I remembered that answer and said, yet will I praise thee, says Renee. If I wasn't a person of faith, and a Jewish woman specifically, I don't know if I would have had the mettle, M-E-T-T-L-E, to do all that I have been granted the strength to do, Baruch Hashem. Renee, what an inspiring piece of writing and what an inspiring thought for all of us, right? And this is the kind of strength that we're trying to take out of that statement, that God doesn't make mistakes. If he sent us a tough challenge, it's because we have the mettle. We have the tools to deal with it, right? According to the camel, so is the burden. And it's this idea that, or like Bill said from the woman that he quoted, when terrible things come our way, we don't have control over that. And it's hard to believe that there, is a reason, God forbid parents face the death of a child, or, or a genocide happens in a generation. How could that be God's plan? We can't understand such a thing. However, although we can't understand it, although it's a suffering that is unimaginable, what we do have the option to do, right, as Viktor Frankl famously said in Man's Search for Meaning, what is in our control is how we react to it, what meaning we take from such a tragedy, right? Are we just going to roll over and say the world is terrible and I don't want any part of it and I'm just waiting to die, or even, God forbid, commit suicide? Or are we going to say this is terrible, but I want to find something meaningful in it, and I want to create some kind of good out of it, right? And we see so many times when, family endures a terrible loss, and what do? They set up a memorial or a fund or a foundation or some kind of an organization that's going to help people and create a good in the world, and that wouldn't have happened but for the tragedies, right? So these people choose to take meaning out of that terrible situation and create a good. And that is the kind of, strength we can take from such a teaching in the face of great challenge. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos. It's always late as we approach summer on Saturday nights. But we'll gather tomorrow, after Shabbos ends in LA. So I'll try to get on the air by like 8:30, 8:45 if I can, maybe closer to 9 p.m. Pacific for page 21. Have a good day, have a good Chodesh, and have a good Shabbos. All the best.